Good morning, everyone. My name is Ivana Hughes. I am the president of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation. I also teach at Columbia University, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to this morning's keynote, which will be a little bit unusual because it will be three of us really doing this together. It's truly such an honor and privilege and pleasure to do this keynote alongside Archbishop John Wester from Monterrey, Mexico. I'm getting an echo again here. I'm just wondering what the Washington physician's account can be muted if you're not speaking right now. Just mute your accounts. Okay, now it seems to be working. So back to the introduction that we're doing this together with Archbishop John Wester and with Jay Coghlan from NukeWatch, New Mexico. The three of us were actually just together in New York City for the third meeting of states parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and we jointly participated in an event we organized at Columbia University. So it's really such a pleasure and honor to be with both of you again. I do want to just say a few words of thanks to Joanne DeFore for her leadership and her role, and for inviting me and including me, and for her role in this movement for decades, to really all of the many organizers who've put this fantastic conference together, and to everyone in attendance for being here and for really taking your Saturday to think about things that are never really pleasant to think about. I have to share, this just happened this morning. I have three children. The youngest is 14 and in 8th grade, and he's working on a social action project. And probably most of you who know me won't be surprised that he chose nuclear weapons as his social action project. So he was working on this morning, and at one point he said to me, "I really hate nuclear weapons." And I said, "Oh, really? And why?" Because they're just so scary. And it's almost like you sort of need to know those two things, and everything comes after that. So let me just say just a couple of words about how this is going to work. I'm going to speak for just a few minutes to really situate us in terms of the theme of the conference of rebuilding the anti-nuclear weapons movement, and why I believe that we should be doing that around the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And then I'll invite Jay and the Archbishop to speak on a couple of related topics as well. The three of us will engage in a little bit of discussion, and we'll have towards the end an opportunity to have some questions from the audience, hopefully both from the live audience and the Zoom audience. So I'm going to share my screen, and it looks like I'm able to do that. Oops, sorry. And we're going to go right in here. And so I really, as I said, I really appreciate the opportunity to come together to think about how we can revitalize the anti-nuclear weapons movement. And I want to make the case that the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is our beacon of hope in these really terrible and dark times. And it's not just when it comes to nuclear weapons. I mean, so many things are not going in the right direction. But I think in addition to providing an actual path forward on the issue of nuclear weapons, the treaty also provides a template for how the international community can come together to solve these existential and important problems, and to really enable humanity to not just continue to exist, but to flourish as well. The nuclear disarmament movement is of course strong and full of passionate people, of organizations who are doing excellent work. But what we have not been admittedly able to do in recent years, really in recent decades, is to awaken the general public to the threat that nuclear weapons continue to pose to our world, and to awaken them in a way that they actually had been awake in other periods of the nuclear age. And so here I do really think that it's useful to look to history for some guidance. So I want to highlight two periods when we had actually intense engagement of the general public, as well as concrete victories. And so on the left, I have an image from, protests that were taking place in the 1960s. You had Women's Strike for Peace, which basically brought women and mothers out onto the streets to protest nuclear weapons in general, but the nuclear testing in specifically. And you also had involvement of kind of key leading figures, Linus Pauling, the Nobel Prize-winning scientist who then went on to win a Nobel Prize for Peace as well, was among them. And what you ended up having was this engagement of the general public that also led to actions on the part of the leaders, John F. Kennedy and Khrushchev coming together and actually bringing about the partial test ban treaty. And I really want to just stress that that treaty, there are people in this room that I believe in this Zoom call, whether you're in the actual physical room or just online, that I really believe would not be alive today had it not been for that treaty. I absolutely believe that. Because if the testing had continued at the levels that it was taking place, it just, some of us would not have been here. In the 1980s, we of course had that same kind of general public engagement, even in some sense, you could say even more so. 1982, the Central Park rally, 1 million people in Central Park, just blocks from where I am now, maybe a mile or so. And you had leaders who came together, Reagan and Gorbachev, and I don't want to say that they accomplished a lot by really beginning to bring down those numbers of nuclear weapons by leaps and bounds. They almost in Reykjavik agreed to eliminate, to abolish all nuclear weapons. They didn't get to that agreement. And I think for me, one of the things that I have been thinking about is how that meeting may have played out differently had there been an international framework for elimination of nuclear weapons. So imagine if in 1986 we had had something like the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. I actually believe that by now we would be living in a world free of them. So let me just say a few things. As bleak as things seem now on so many fronts, we do have something we can rally around, and that is the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. It was negotiated in 2017 with support of 122 countries. It entered into force in 2021 in the midst of the pandemic, and currently, there are 73 what are referred to as states parties, so countries that have either ratified or acceded to the treaty, and another 25 signatories who are working towards ratification in their own national legislatures. And this is really with 98 states. We're actually one state short of more than half of UN members who would be eligible to join the treaty. So we're really getting there, and we need to push this treaty forward. So what does the treaty do? It does things that those people, the Linus Pauling picture said, UN, get rid of nuclear terror. I mean, the very first UN resolution in 1945 was about nuclear weapons. John F. Kennedy in the United Nations in 1961 said we must abolish them before they abolish us. This is stuff that we've known for decades. We've known that these weapons have to go. And now we have an international instrument that can help us to get there. And the treaty basically prohibits everything and anything you can imagine having to do with nuclear weapons possession, development, stockpiling, use, threat of use. There are a whole bunch of things listed, transfer, et cetera, et cetera. And so the treaty has had three what are called meetings of states parties, and there will be a review conference next year in 2026 in November. That will be the first review conference of the treaty. So what is happening now in these kind of in-between meeting periods is that the diplomats and civil society, everyone's coming together to really scientists. I'm part of the scientific advisory group to the treaty. Everyone is really coming together to achieve these three key objectives. One is universalization of the treaty, getting more countries to join it, sign it, but also getting its norms to be widely accepted as part of international law. And then there are also I'm highlighting two objectives that are very much related to scientific work, which is something very important to me. And those are humanitarian provisions for victim assistance and environmental remediation. This has to do with both nuclear weapons use, so in Japan with the Hibakusha, as well as the nuclear testing period, which took place over many decades in many parts of the world and has really devastated communities throughout the globe. And then there's another kind of sciencey objective, but actually a very important one for policy and politics. This is something that actually was kind of a key issue that Kennedy and Khrushchev were dealing with the partial test ban treaty. And it's the issue of how do you verify that someone has eliminated their nuclear weapons program? How would you verify that they're not restarting it, and so on and so forth? So figuring out how that would be done is really important. So my view is that we have to push and push until the dam breaks. And I do believe the dam will break. What we're trying to prevent is not just another Hiroshima. It's not just another Nagasaki. With 12,500 nuclear weapons in possession of 9 states, the risks are absolutely enormous. There's like a computer console game called Fallout 4 Nuclear Winter, but it's not a game. And this is real. From the basically think of it as murder of millions of people, from the explosions themselves to radiation killing many more post attacks, to impacts of nuclear winter, temperatures reducing across the globe, and food and agriculture failing, and people beginning to starve, to also destruction of the ozone layer. I mean, this is just what these weapons threaten to do to our planet, to humanity, to all life on the planet, is just absolutely and completely unacceptable. And so, we need to do everything and anything we can. I've just put a few things here, conferences like this one, talks, webinars. I talk a lot. If anyone invites me, whether it's a class of, 12 students at a school, or whether it's, to speak in front of larger audiences, I accept all invitations. So making videos, podcasts, doing social media, writing op-eds, traveling to DC to speak to our leaders who are, I'm sad to say, largely both ignorant and dismissive of the issue. But we have to keep talking about it. Local initiatives, things like city appeals, I Can City Appeal, and so on. But also the role of, and looking back at for example, the 1980s, recently listened to Sting's song, Russians. I hope the Russians love their children too. We need more art, we need music, we need films, we need the general public to wake up. So on that note, I'm going to end my presentation. Let's see, I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to invite first Jay to tell us a little bit more about what it is that nuclear weapons threaten to do, and what I believe is really a very key issue that's been kind of turned around, this issue of nuclear deterrence, where the claim is that nuclear weapons keep us safe, and therefore that's why we have them, rather than, seeing them for what they are, weapons that threaten all of humanity. So Jay, let me invite you to offer a few words.
Okay, well, it'll be more than a few words.
Okay, yes.
But in any event, I'm Jay Coghlan with NukeWatch, New Mexico. I'm based in Santa Fe, and I can look out my window right now and see the birthplace of nuclear weapons about 20 miles away. And of course, that is Los Alamos. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. And here we go with the usual technical problems, unfortunately.
You're sharing, Jay. You just need to get to your
To the document.
to your document. Yeah.
Great, great. That's good to hear. Let's see, except I need to start at the beginning. Okay. All right, sorry for these delays. So Ivana mentioned that Reagan and Gorbachev came quite close to signing a nuclear weapons ban treaty in 1988. And I want to point out that it was basically the lies of Edward Teller associated with the Livermore lab that kept Reagan from signing that deal. And specifically, it was over Star Wars. And I use this in part to point out, if you don't know already, it's kind of, in my view, it's the nuclear weapons labs that are the tail that wag the dog. And basically, because of these labs, first of all, that ban treaty was not signed in 1988. And now we have a $1.7 trillion modernization program. So I want to address another, I'm going to call it a falsehood. I'm not prepared to say that this one is an outright lie. It's more like a half truth. And it's deterrence, which is basically the one word rationale that underpins, again, this $1.7 trillion modernization program and the new nuclear arms race that we're in. So for starters, I'm going to try to be brief and run through these things. Just know that there's a high-level policy document called the Nuclear Posture Review. Every president does it. Trump did one in 2018. I don't know if he's doing another one. That 2022 review, that was Biden's. And again, the underlying rationale for the whole enterprise is so-called deterrence. But if there's any point I really want to drive home right here, right now, the Pentagon has always rejected minimal deterrence. And that employment strategy 2024 that I cite there, that's actually a follow-on to the posture review. But this is how the Pentagon implements it. And as you can see, minimal deterrence is rejected. It's explicitly rejected. And instead, they're relying on counterforce. And I know this gets a little wonky, but counterforce is nuclear weapons jargon for keeping warfighting capabilities. And that's why we end up having just endless modifications and or new designs, all for so-called flexible capabilities and different employment options. And this is the essence of what is driving the $1.7 trillion nuclear weapons modernization program, and hence the new arms race. It is keeping this posture of nuclear warfighting. So again, this is why we have thousands of weapons instead of just a few hundred for so-called deterrence. And be aware that, in brief, what's going on in the United States under this modernization program, it's just a complete makeover. And it's essentially a nuclear weapons forever program. They're taking every warhead in the planned stockpile, they're rebuilding it and giving them new military capabilities at the same time. Plus, now they're coming up with new design weapons that can't be tested, or alternatively could prompt the US to resume testing, after which all hell would break loose. Just the other weapons powers would start testing. Something that the public doesn't know is that the US is building now new production facilities that are expected to operate for at least another 50 years. So on to the year 2080 and beyond. And we're going to have new heavy bombers, new intercontinental ballistic missiles, new cruise missiles, new submarines, every one of which is way beyond budget and behind schedule at this point. I do very much like pointing out that slide from Los Alamos Lab. That is a lab slide. So, if you live around the various labs, you'll hear fluff about how they work on global climate change, they work on preventing AIDS, et cetera, et cetera. But just know by their own admission, they don't publicize that. But right there, that is their central mission, are these incredibly destructive weapons that could end civilization overnight. Now, one reason why the deterrence itself is the threat is that there is a long history of accidents and miscalculations. And if you're ever in Albuquerque, go to the Atomic Science Museum, which is basically a nuclear weapons museum, but you'll see two of the bomb cases that dropped on the coast of Spain, and you see the dents in the nose cones. With respect to the one in Goldsboro, one of those H-bombs went through 4 of 5 arming steps on the way down. It was only one final arming step that prevented a megaton bomb from going off. Now, those accidents there, they were back in the late 50s and early 60s. And surely things have improved since then. But on the miscalculation fronts, please be aware that it was only one Soviet sub officer that prevented nuclear Armageddon during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And normally he would not have been in that sub to begin with. He was kind of a political officer. So there was a very close call. In 1983, we had another mid-level Soviet commander who, when he got warnings of incoming American ICBMs, used his own judgment, realizing something was funny. And to make a long story short, his radars were picking up sunlight reflecting off of clouds, and his own personal judgment arguably prevented nuclear Armageddon right there. But the big question I want to pose is what is going to happen when artificial intelligence, and I'm afraid this is going to be inevitable, but it seeps more and more into nuclear weapons command and control. What's going to happen when AI sidelines human judgment? So I do want to just pitch the general idea. It is the deterrence itself that is the threat. And, I'm somewhat of a political animal. And I think in the long run, and believe me, this will be daunting, but somehow in the long run, we need to persuade Congress as a whole that deterrence, as claimed, is only a half truth. It is deterrence plus nuclear warfighting capabilities that really put the entire world under peril. I do want to pitch three books towards, and in which I have no financial interest. You ought to read these books, specifically on Command and Control by Eric Schlosser. That kind of covers accidents within the United States. But with respect to deterrence itself being the threat, I strongly recommend The Doomsday Machine by Daniel Ellsberg, who, of course, is famous for being the Pentagon Papers whistleblower. But he was even more concerned about the fate of humanity with respect to nuclear weapons. And then more recently, Nuclear War by Annie Jacobsen. Highly recommend that book as well. Arguably, this arms race, and I'm going to say with the possible exception of the Cuban Missile Crisis and perhaps two other incidents, but this arms race is arguably more dangerous than the first. And that's because we have multiple nuclear actors. We got new hypersonic and cyber weapons, and we got artificial intelligence. And throughout all of this, we have these massive modernization programs by all of the nuclear weapons powers, although the United States is in a league all by itself in terms of money and the extent of it. Um, I consider myself to be a master only of the obvious, but I ask this obvious question: why is nuclear disarmament necessary? And I'm going to have Defense Secretary Robert McNamara, Secretary during the Cuban Missile Crisis, answer that. And to me, it's astonishing to have a Defense Secretary say that we survived nuclear war only by luck. And my little punchline is observing the obvious. Counting on luck is not a good long-term survival strategy. Briefly, and this is to kind of bring it home on the Seattle office, the Kitsap submarine base, otherwise known as Bangor or et cetera, et cetera. Of course, it's classified or not really known if it's a first order target, but it probably is. And has up to 8 strategic subs with immense firepower, just immense firepower. So I think it's pretty safe to assume that Kitsap submarine base, which, as I understand it, is just due west of Seattle. So if it's a target, the effects that it would have on Seattle and the surrounding area are just horrendous. I'll let the facts there speak for themselves. But if you read that book I read recommended by Daniel Ellsberg, The Doomsday Machine, he really lays out the case about how there is no such thing as a limited nuclear war. And once it gets going, it's all out. So do please read that. But that brings me to the effects of what that would mean. And, you know, I assure you all, I'm a happy go lucky fella. And here we are discussing this. But, we're talking about 360 million deaths. We're talking 5 billion people. We're talking the supermajority of the human population starving in a nuclear winter. So that's why we're doing this work. And in my view, all right, I'll speak only for myself, but I'm doing this work so the human race can survive in order to achieve, its fullest potential, whatever that is, but it's not nuclear weapons. So finally, I'm going to wrap up what you can do. I had to learn this the hard way, that the small stuff is important. Letters to the editor, op-eds. I got to admire Ivana when she says she'll accept any and all invitations. I'm not that ready to go that far. But it's important. These meetings, these conferences, talk to people. I am pointing out to my Washington State friends, you have some very well-positioned members of Congress. Of course, they're Democratic Party. They're in the minority right now. But I regard both Patty Murray and Adam Smith as very important. Now, I believe Patty Murray is kind of more focused on cleanup of Hanford. One thing y'all could do is get her more interested in the new arms race. And she's just in a very important position as ranking member of Senate Energy and Water Appropriations. And similarly, with Representative Adam Smith. And first of all, he's ranking member of the entire House Armed Services Committee and Strategic Forces. And I can't dwell on it now, but he has disappointed me in the past. So I expect you Washington State folks to straighten him out. We got the up and coming 80th anniversaries. I believe that Archbishop Wester is going to in part address that, but clearly they're a big, big deal. This is the time to demand progress towards nuclear disarmament. 80 years old, the weapons should be retired. Ivana's already touched upon the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. I just generically say support it. But for example, go to the United Nations, educate your members of Congress on it. It's important to know, and I'm not going to get into details, but the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in large part arose simply out of the frustration of the non-weapon states over the weapon states' failure to ever begin to honor the Non-Proliferation Treaty's mandate to disarm. I want to make clear that politically I'm bipartisan. I say pox on both parties. So in that sense, I'm bipartisan. But I will observe at the same time that the up and coming November 2026 midterm elections are really going to be crucial. I mean, I kind of consider them to be the most important elections, well, on deck in my lifetime. And it may seem like a ways away, but it's going to be very important. And then my last and final point, we really need to question and puncture the myth of deterrence. Again, I would describe deterrence as only a half truth. It is a hybrid of deterrence and keeping nuclear warfighting capabilities. And again, that's why we have thousands of weapons instead of just a few hundred. That's why we have a $1.7 trillion modernization program. And that's why we have a new arms race. So, as you speak to members of Congress, family, and friends, I think it's crucial that we puncture the myth of deterrence, and that we actually need that in order to be able to even politically move forward in trying to achieve a world free of nuclear weapons. So, again, let's puncture the myth of deterrence. And thank you all for hearing me out.
Thank you so
And
much, Jay. Thank you so much for those really insightful remarks. I really appreciate the book recommendations you gave. I think all three are excellent books. I just want to highlight something that I've actually often quoted from Daniel Ellsberg's The Doomsday Machine. Maybe if you just stop sharing your screen.
I'm trying,
Yeah,
but
perfect,
you
perfect.
keep speaking,
Yeah, yeah,
please.
yeah. That's good. Something that I've shared, a quote I've shared frequently from Daniel Ellsberg's Doomsday Machine. He writes at one point about the nuclear weapons policies, both past and present, and he says that they're dizzyingly insane and immoral. And I think that's another, very clear way to think about what's happening. And just one other thing I want to highlight from Annie Jacobson's book is that she describes minute by minute what would happen in case of a nuclear war. She has a very specific scenario, and it's 72 minutes between the United States, for example, detecting that there is a strike coming towards Washington, D.C., and basically the end of the world as we know it. So I'll stop on that note. And on the note of dizzyingly insane and immoral, I'm going to invite Archbishop John Wester to tell us a little bit about his approach to these issues, the work that he has been doing, and also, of course, the way in which your own community has been impacted by nuclear weapons. So, Archbishop, please, thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Ivana, and thank you, Jay. It's certainly an honor to be with you all today, and I'm very grateful for the invitation. And of course, you're speaking about morality, what Daniel Ellsberg said, dizzyingly immoral, and that's right up my alley. So I'm happy to be able to share with you, and I know your own thoughts on this matter, the morality of nuclear weapons. And of course, there's the fire and brimstone approach, which we certainly is not ineffective. And I'm glad that Jay underscored the harsh reality of nuclear weapons. You too, Ivana, that what they would actually do, I think, is mind-boggling. And I think that hell and fire brimstone approach is a good one, but it's not the only one. And we need a lot of approaches to this very complicated and urgent and important movement, a lot of ways of looking at it. And so that's what I hope to do just very briefly, is just to suggest ways that we might work with one another, your neighbor, your coworker, your fellow student, your classmate. How can we talk to one another? What are the approaches we might use to underscore that we've got to eliminate nuclear weapons from the face of the earth? Pope Francis did that in a very shocking, bold way in November of 2019 when visiting Hiroshima. And the Pope said and declared apodictically, with no equivocation, that the mere possession of nuclear weapons is immoral. That was, in the world of morality, in our tradition, that was cataclysmic. His bold declaration was a seismic shift from our long-held position that nuclear weapons are allowed as deterrence. And I think that Jay has put that argument to bed and to rest very beautifully. Now, some may know that in 1983, the United States Catholic bishops came out with the peace pastoral. My dear friend, Archbishop Quinn, was instrumental in that. And in that pastoral, that very significant pastoral, they did allow for deterrence, but they allowed only in the context of nation states, particularly nuclear states, moving toward nuclear abolition. That was the proviso that, yes, okay, we're going to hold our nose and say deterrence is okay for now, as long as we're moving toward getting rid of them. Clearly, that proviso never came to pass. It started to, but then it quickly reversed itself, and we're in the mess we're in today. And so, as Jay mentioned, we're arguably in a second arms race that's certainly more dangerous, probably more likely than the first, with AI, hypersonic delivery systems, multinational players, etc. And so, to my mind, I have to say, if you allow me, I'm rather proud that the Vatican was the first to sign the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the first city-state to sign it. And the Pope now has, in my mind, radically changed all Catholic moral thinking vis-a-vis nuclear weapons. Our Catholic social teaching is clear in a variety of ways in that nuclear weapons must go, whether from the point of view of the sanctity of human life, the common good, subsidiarity, which says that issues and problems should be solved at the lowest level possible. Whatever it is, our teaching is clear. But let me be more specific. I'm not just talking Catholic here. I think we need to look at from a broad perspective of morality, a broad perspective of a care for the human race and the environment in which we live, and the earth, our common home. What are the perspectives that we could point to that would help us engage a conversation with people that will ultimately lead to the abolition of nuclear weapons? One thing I think about is, especially if you're talking to someone who is religious, is that we're not God. In case it hasn't dawned on us and humanity, all the things that Ivana and Jay have been saying are having human beings play God. Hunter Thompson once said, human beings are the only creatures on earth that claim a God and the only thing that behaves like it hasn't got one. We're stewards of the gifts God gives us. We're creatures, not gods. In humility, we must avoid anything that can, in a matter of hours, destroy what God has created. The story of Adam and Eve is archetypal here. When human beings try to become as gods, they lose the Garden of Eden, and they must endure the cruel reality of paradise lost. All right, well, maybe the person you're talking to says, well, I don't believe in God. I still think that's a powerful argument whether you do or not. But anyway, all right, talk about right relationships. That just from a human point of view, human beings are made to relate to one another. From a religious point of view, we say that's because God made us in God's image and likeness. And God is communal, ergo we're communal. But okay, even if you're not religious, human beings are communal. From the very moment of our births, we're striving to relate. Children in a crib, when they cry, yeah, they might have a dirty diaper, they're hungry, whatever. Moms and dads know when the cry is different from that, when the child feels abandoned, because the child can't conceptualize that mom and dad are in the other room. We're made to relate to one another. And so nuclear arms destroy those relationships completely and absolutely. Nuclear arms exist in silos. Silos aren't good for humanity, both the kind that nuclear arms rest in and silos that we often put ourselves in that divorce us from sound, right relationships. Another, going back to the more religious perspective, is that for us, and not just for Catholics and Christians, but for many major religions, peace is a major theme, a major tenet. In Islam, the Quran promotes peace through its core values, insisting that peace is one of the names of God. Judaism preaches peace, love your neighbor as yourself. Hinduism, the Vedas advise people to be peaceful in their daily lives and explain how to achieve a peaceful life. In Buddhism, the non-injury of other living things is critical. Its teachings emphasize that violence harms the spiritual state of the perpetrator as well as the victim. And so I would contend that any religion worth its salt, if you will, is going to insist that peace, harmony is essential to the moral life. Now, sometimes the person you're talking to, maybe you're during a lunch break and you're standing at the water cooler and you say to your coworker, I know, let's talk about nuclear weapons. And they're going to say, what are you? Well, they'll say, yeah, well, don't give me that stuff. The just war theory's been around for generations. St. Augustine, all the way back to the 300s, and St. Thomas Aquinas refining it, always talk about the just war. Well, you can tell your friend at the water cooler that, and maybe I do intend this pun, that nuclear weapons blows the just war theory out of the water. For one thing, critical to the just war theory is probability of success. As Jay pointed out, and so did Ivana, the Reagan and Gorbachev talk, nuclear war can never be won, and a nuclear war must never be fought. The probability of success is non-existent. In an all-out nuclear war, everyone's a loser. There's no success. That word doesn't exist. Proportionality. There is no proportionality in Armageddon. Everything is destroyed. All of human civilization. The effects are long-lasting. A nuclear winter will go on for at least a decade, if not more. Civilian casualties. The just war theory has always said that there cannot be or must, by all means possible, limit civilian casualties. In Hiroshima and Nagasaki, civilian casualties that were the target. Those cities were bombed, they're destroyed. So I think it's quite clear that the just war theory, I think moral theologians can debate it forever, but with nuclear weapons, I think the debate has come to a close. It's just not possible. I think also we have to look at the fact that nuclear weapons take money from the poor and the disenfranchised and those on the periphery and those without advocacy. I could spend hours beginning to talk about, and Ivana and Jay could do a much better job. But let me just say, in the interest of time, and Jay's already touched on it, that nuclear weapons are extraordinarily expensive, very expensive, and use money that could be used for child welfare, education. Here in New Mexico, 1 out of 5 children goes to bed hungry every night. We're one of the poorest states in the union. And it's just a tragedy. The money that's spent on nuclear weapons. People tell me, yeah, but Los Alamos, Sandia, all that federal money coming in. Los Alamos has a budget higher than the entire state of New Mexico for this fiscal year coming up. But that money doesn't trickle down. Trickling doesn't work in that, and we do not benefit from that money at all. There's another more subtle argument that I think is worthy of talking about, and that's the dominant culture and colonialism. Looking at it touches on the doctrine of discovery, colonialism. Countries with nuclear arsenals tend to be mostly wealthy, well-developed countries. North Korea would be an exception, but the reality is that we dominate the world scene, the geopolitical world. We threaten the non-nuclear states, especially the poor states and the underdeveloped states. So they are captives, if you will, to our hegemony, to our desire to rule the world, to be the superpower of the world. And so that's not right. That's immoral to hold people captive like that. This is a more subtle argument, but I think it's a very powerful one. We know what happens to people because of colonialism and because of the doctrine of discovery. And here in New Mexico, we deal with that a lot here. And so I think that on a larger scale, nuclear weapons fall into that immoral reality. There's also the reality of radiation poisoning. And I would point to Tina Cordova and her work with the Tularosa Basin downwinders. We don't have time to go into it now, but you know how many people have already been hurt. Obviously, the ones in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but also here in the United States and other countries because of the uranium mines, because of the development of the bombs. Tina Cordova is a real hero in my mind. She has cancer and has had it, and she and her family is going down through 5 generations. Clearly, nuclear weapons are something that are extraordinarily dangerous. We mustn't think of them just as being innate or somehow impotent. They're already hurting us and continue to hurt us because of their potency. So what can be done? Well, just to share with you very quickly, what we've done here in the Archdiocese of Santa Fe. As you may know, we published a letter in January of 2022, Living in the Light of Christ's Peace, a Conversation Toward Nuclear Disarmament. Pax Christi, I'm going to shout out to Pax Christi, have been very helpful to us in promoting that letter. I think it's a helpful letter for people, maybe for a discussion group, and if you wanted to start a group and talk about it, students perhaps at Columbia University there could, it's something that people could use. It's very practical. It's not that long, about 52 pages. It has pictures. And so I think it's very practical. But the whole idea is to engage the conversation. Don't be afraid to talk about it. I know that I always feel like a skunk at a lawn party, can I talk to you a little bit about how we're all going to die with nuclear weapons? And they go, oh yeah, I can't wait to talk about that. Well, sometimes we have to talk about difficult things. And we have to be able to face them so that we can avoid a harsher reality in the future. It's been mentioned, Ivana mentioned so beautifully, the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. I've been privileged to speak through the auspices of ICANN at that twice now, to speak in favor of the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. I think we should all promote that. That's practical, it's doable, it's real, and I think that's something we can all get behind. We're going to have a Trinity Test commemoration here in the Archdiocese. I don't think it's possible to overstate the importance of this 80th anniversary. People gravitate toward whole numbers and to anniversaries and commemorations. So I think this is an ideal moment not to let that pass. Please look at what you can do to participate, even if you go online and support different groups that are going to be going to Japan, having commemorations. It's a good way to heighten an awareness of what's going on. We're going to have, hopefully, this is still in the planning stages, so I can't say too much, but we hope to be able to go to the Trinity Test site itself on July 16th and have an ecumenical interfaith prayer service. It will not be a protest or anything like that. It's going to be a prayer service to pray on the 80th anniversary of that, I would say, awful day when the first nuclear bomb was detonated and ushered us into the nuclear age. In August, we're going to be going, Archbishop Etienne and I will go to Japan, to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and to commemorate, along with Cardinal McElroy and Cardinal Supich of Chicago, Cardinal McElroy of Washington, D.C., to again commemorate and mark this very difficult commemoration of the 80th anniversary of that terrible time in August of 1945. I'd like to also say that I'm very encouraged and very optimistic and grateful for this partnership that we formed. This Archdiocese of Santa Fe, the Archdiocese of Seattle, the Archdiocese of Nagasaki, and the Diocese of Hiroshima have formed what we call the Partnership for a World Without Nuclear Weapons, the PWNW, we're calling it, the Partnership for a World Without Nuclear Weapons. All groups are invited, not Catholic and non-Catholic, to join either as participating or endorsing members. And even participating, it's not a huge, takes one meeting a year, but the point is to get as many people involved in our partnership, supporting our partnership for a world without nuclear weapons. I know, especially I'd like to have a shout out to our young people. We need to get more young people, it seems to me, and so we're going to be trying to engage the University of New Mexico in these commemorations this summer and try to get other universities. I know that Hero, one of our involved in the partnership, is working on other universities to get involved. I know Ivana Hughes said, I was just so impressed to go to Columbia University last March and see those students. They give me hope and joy and life. to see those young students so engaged in this and so involved. And you're a saint, Ivana, for doing that. I just quote, I left this quote. I got it from Jay and the NukeWatch New Mexico on their website. But I just think, especially from my Catholic background, General Omar Bradley, another, I think, a strong voice in this, maybe one you wouldn't expect. But he said, ours is a world of nuclear giants and ethical infants. We know more about war than we know about peace, more about killing than we know about living. We've grasped the mystery of the atom and rejected the Sermon on the Mount. Thank you for your attention, and God bless you all.
Thank you so much, Archbishop Wester, for those absolutely inspiring and wonderful remarks. You pulled on so many threads. You brought everything together through the lens of morality. You brought in young people. You talked about the very important Catholic perspective, which actually did play a role in those previous times of good, great public engagement on these issues. Pope John Paul the 23rd played a key role in actually bringing Khrushchev and Kennedy together to move towards the partial test ban treaty. I mean, these were absolutely seminal contributions. So thank you for bringing all that to us, as well as the fact that it doesn't have to be just the Catholic faith. This should really be an interfaith effort. And by interfaith, I'll include, the atheists too. Everyone should have a place at this table and should play a role in bringing about not just a world in which we actually continue to exist, but also a better world in which we spend all those resources on making the planet safer and better for everyone. So thank you so very much. It's really been such an honor and a privilege. I regret that we don't have time for questions or further discussion. But I'm going to hand it off to the hosts. Thank you, everyone, so very much.